morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got another great show for you today. Let's get right to our top story, political news. Vice President Kamala Harris did, in fact, sit down for an interview where the journalist challenged her for a change. How about that? Here's a glimpse of Fox News Bret Baier handling the VP on his program last night.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade,
people have become...
power. But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me.
Harris did try and do some damage control after that question and separated herself from President Biden. Let's watch.
You're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders.
Baier also took the opportunity to press Harris on the administration's handling of the border. Baier named young women who were allegedly killed by men who had entered the country illegally.
Do you owe those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border.
And things got a little spicy when Baier interrupted Harris. In fact, one could even call it talking over her. Let's watch.
Was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes.
Online, people seemed split along party lines as to how Harris fared. For example, Trump wrote on X, quote, "Great job by Bret Baier in his interview with Lion Kamala Harris. She has a massive and irredeemable case of Trump derangement syndrome." While Mark Cuban, the tech investor, wrote on X, quote, "The beautiful thing about the Bret Baier interview is that Kamala Harris understood and responded to each question. She used examples of policies. She gave real-world context. When Bret went after her, she didn't call him names and she didn't quit the interview." Meanwhile, over on MSNBC, the hosts were fuming over Baier's handling of the interview. Let's listen to Mika.
As you saw, it almost immediately devolved into an embarrassing bad faith effort by a once respected host to play to an audience of one. The host's constant, rude interruptions were designed to distract from the issues and facts that Trump and his acolytes try and twist and distort every day, and on Fox News they try and avoid.
Elon Musk poked fun of the mainstream media's nearly identical headlines. He wrote on X, quote, "Testy is this week's sharp as a tack." And the Mika reaction to me, Niall, is the most unhinged one of all, because I thought it was a pretty good interview. I don't think Kamala Harris bombed, and I'm pretty, harsh on her in general. I also don't think, the Fox audience watching is going to be, wow, I got to take a second look at this person. Maybe I'm going to vote for. But I think she did a pretty good job. I think, Bret did a good job. At times, butting in, interrupting. I think if you do a little bit of that, it's fine. I don't think it went so far over the line that it was rude. I think she handled it well. It was a pretty good interview. It got into some real subjects on immigration, tried to hold her accountable. She did her best to explain what her positions are and distance herself from the administration. Again, I don't think it's going to put a ton new percentage points in the Kamala Harris votes for her category, but I don't think she bombed by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I mean, first things first, Kamala Harris did this interview with a network that she knew would be somewhat adversarial to her, and, credit to her for doing that. And not just credit to her, credit for Trump when he does it in reverse. I, as a reporter, would prefer much more occurrences of interviews where people go on knowing that they will be met with rigorous questioning. Like you, I did not think Bret Baier went over the line. Maybe you could argue that one that we showed there where he was interrupting a little much, maybe you could argue that was slightly too aggressive. But, the Mika comment that we played, it's interesting that she talks about Baier purportedly playing to an audience. So much of the problem that I have with a good portion of cable news, not all, but a good portion, is that it's just playing to its audience all the time and just reinforcing whatever views they wish to have. So when the Democrat gets questioned by a Fox interviewer, MSNBC called that rude. If MSNBC takes a pop at Trump, Fox comes to his defense, and it becomes rather predictable. As for the interview itself, in brief, Robby, I do think that if you're looking at it from a political standpoint, to state the obvious, it's up to the interviewer to select the questions, and significant chunks of this interview were spent on immigration and, to a lesser extent, the trans issue. And neither of those, I don't think, are to Kamala Harris's benefit. So I'm not sure that she gets, among any sort of swing voters, she may get some abstract credit for going on Fox, but I don't think her defending herself on immigration is going to really sway people very much.
Yeah, I mean, the reason to do this and the way that it helps her is now it deprives the other side of a little bit of ammunition in making the case that she's afraid of confrontational interviews, that she avoids the press, that she'll only talk to people she agrees with under narrow circumstances, that she's not out there and, she can't stand up, she can't take the heat, right? That's something that I've said a lot because she has not done very many interviews compared with any other candidate in her position, part of that being the novelty of her suddenly becoming the candidate so late in the game. But this does, sap that line of attack of a little bit of its potency. And from her standpoint, that's a good thing, even if it isn't winning a bunch of new voters. It changes the narrative a little bit. I was interested to see her always highlight one of the policies that I think is the easiest to criticize among her things she's proposing to do, the housing thing. Look, I would love to make housing more affordable for Americans. This is a huge issue. Housing costs are astronomical in a lot of places in the country. That has to do with tight regulation of zoning and labor and the costs of building, construct, all of that kind of stuff, and really the zoning being a major part of it, and how many occupants are going to be in a certain building in a certain area. The stories all this time of neighborhoods using their power to shut down new development, that kind of thing. And her solution, which she touted to Bret Baier, again, is to give $25,000 to new home buyers. That's going to go directly into the pricing of houses going up. And I really don't think it's a good idea. Again, if you're an existing homeowner, maybe this is a nice plan because then you can raise the price of your house if you're going to sell it. But she, again, talked about that one. She does have a lot of smart business people on her side. Mark Cuban has, on some level, become her most, I think, persuasive person out there making the case to pro-business, pro-market, some tech libertarian people. Obviously, there's a lot of support for Trump in that tech, Peter Thiel world. Mark Cuban's also kind of in that world and is making the case for Kamala and is doing a pretty good job of it. But this is not her best policy, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can discuss, of course, the rights and wrongs of that policy and whether it would do what it sets out to do. I think the political utility of it is at least the appearance that she is trying to address an issue that is something that people feel very deeply. And it's part of this bigger argument that she seeks to make, that she is focused on trying to do things like that, whereas Trump, in her view, is basically too much of a narcissist to worry over much about those kinds of things. Just briefly, Robby, in terms of the things that this interview sort of rebutted in terms of common attacks upon her, I did think when she appeared to get legitimately angry about what she sees as Trump's authoritarian tendencies, I actually thought that was quite effective for her, because it did show her being a bit more passionate and a bit less cautious and calculated, as we often portray her as being.
Coming up next on Rising, I have a radar for you all about the Kamala Harris plagiarism allegations. Stay tuned for that.